And so this morning we're going to be in Acts chapter 5. We're going to be continuing on in our study of Acts. But this morning we've kind of geared it a little bit to our students, but also to us as well, because there's so much that we can draw from the text that we're going to be talking through this morning. And I've loved the book of Acts, not just because it's a history book of the church, but also just because there's so much that we can glean from it, where we see trial and struggle and suffering and heartache, but we also see God showing up in amazing and miraculous ways. And there's such a moving of the Spirit throughout the book that you can't help but know that God is alive and well, and that God is going to do amazing things. And so if I could truly summarize the book of Acts into one verse, it would all be summarized down to chapter 1, verse 8. And chapter 1, verse 8 says, "You shall receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. And you shall then be my witness in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to all the ends of the earth." Jesus is saying this right as he's about to ascend to heaven, and he's speaking directly to the disciples. He's telling them that my Spirit is going to come upon you, the great helper. Just as John chapter 14 tells us, it's going to come upon you. You are going to be a vessel, and all I need you to be in that moment is faithful. I need you to faithfully do, faithfully walk in obedience, and faithfully speak. I don't need you to come up with the words to speak. I don't need you to do it. I just need you to move. I'll give you everything else, and we're going to talk about that this morning. But the other thing that I love, too, about Acts is that all throughout the book, we see persecution showing up, but then we also see something special. And I want to give you a bit of a visual, but I also want to share with you a bit of a dumb story because, well, I'm a boy, and it's kind of what we do. We love to do dumb stuff. Matter of fact, when I was a kid, my favorite thing to do was to get a beach ball and go into the pool and try to sit on it. And usually what would happen is it would just roll you over, and usually my foot would get caught on something, and I'd just be hung out under the water, kind of drowning a little bit. But I'd be doing okay, you know? It's not fun unless there's somehow in a visit to the ER or a broken bone involved, right? That's my life, right? When I was about 15, I would look at the roof and be like, man, it would be fun to jump off that with an umbrella and see if it works. Now I look at it and I'm like, that would still be fun, but my knees are going to hurt tomorrow. So there's age that plays into there now. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is that I would try and sit down on this beach ball, and when I do, what would happen? Well, there's this amazing thing called buoyancy. What would it do? Beach ball come flying back to the surface with me attached to it. Didn't matter what you did, beach ball was going to come back. No matter how hard I pushed down on it, no matter how much weight I put down on it, no matter what I did, the beach ball was going to way back to the surface. Well, the same thing applies to the church in the book of Acts and the church in the modern era too. No matter how many times it has tried to be snuffed out, no matter how many times it has tried to be shoved down, no matter how many times it has tried to be silenced, the church comes boiling back to the surface, comes rushing right back to the top. And so what can we draw from this? Well, the thing we can draw from this is that the church grows under persecution. I'll say that again. The church grows under persecution. We shouldn't be fleeing from persecution, but rather, this is a bold idea, sometimes we should be running towards it. I know it's difficult to say that. And I'm not in any way saying that that's what we should be aiming for. But we should count it an honor and a privilege, as Paul put it, to be suffering for the sake of the gospel. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, because that's exactly what the disciples were enduring the entire time through the book of Acts. And so we're going to be in Acts chapter 5, verse 17 through 21 this morning. So Acts chapter 5, verse 17 says this. "But the high priest rose up, and all who were with him, that is the party of the Sadducees, and filled with jealousy, they arrested the apostles and put them in the public prison. But during the night, an angel of the Lord opened the prison doors and brought them out and said, 'Go and stand in the temple and speak to the people all the words of this life.' And when they heard this, they entered the temple at daybreak and began to teach." So what do we see? Well, we see that the Sadducees were immediately filled with jealousy. Well, why? Why would they be filled with jealousy? And what exactly is jealousy? Right? These are all common questions that some of us may ask as we look at the text. Well, let's dig deeper. So what's going on before this? Well, the disciples were performing miraculous works, and they were healing in Jesus' name, and they were loving people, and they were doing as they had commanded. They were living on mission. They were sharing the gospel. They were proclaiming and advancing the kingdom. They were telling about Christ. They were not following the status quo. They were not going along with the cultural norms. They were not doing as everyone else were doing. They were living bold and unashamed and not scared of what the world had to say. They were speaking truth. And that's the thing about it, is sometimes we are scared to speak truth or live boldly. And sometimes we're more ashamed than unashamed. But we have to remember a few things. And there's 3 things that we have to remember this morning as we truly try to live on mission like the disciples were. So what's the first thing that we have to remember? Well, what did Jesus say to them as before he ascended to heaven? He said, I will give you my Spirit. Well, how do we attain the Spirit? It starts with relationship. It starts with coming to know Christ. The disciples walked with Jesus. And so what did that make them? It made them be set apart. They were not like the world. They stood out. You put them in a crowd and they were different. They shined. They were a bright light in a dark room. They were not a lamp under a basket. They were not a candle that had been blown out. No, they were boldly and unashamed, ready to do whatever it took to love those around them, to serve those, and to live on mission as Christ had done. And here's one thing that's kind of a radical thought, right? Because sometimes it seems like we get just absolutely, it blows our mind when people hate us or people don't like us. But here's a radical thought, right? Jesus was perfect. Even people hated him. So why should we be scared too? Why should we not expect the same? If we're truly going to live on mission, then we should expect some sort of opposition. Because what did it do? Well, if we look at the text again, right, it says that they were filled with jealousy. And jealousy is destructive. We've all dealt with jealousy, whether it be in our own selves or whether it would be with someone being jealous of us. Jealousy is rooted in a sense of a fleshly pride. Jealousy says that I want that, and they have it, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to attain it, no matter what it means. And so what is the root of not only the Sadducees' jealousy, but sometimes of our jealousy, and sometimes the jealousy of those around us? Well, let's try to pick it apart here. Well, what were the disciples doing, and what were the Sadducees not doing? Well, the disciples were loving people. What were the Sadducees doing? Well, they wanted all the eyes on them. They didn't want to serve. They wanted to be served. They didn't want to help people. They wanted people to help them. And so it starts with a lack of love for our fellow men and a sense of lovelessness. And that begins to create a sense of jealousy within us, because it starts with having a lack of love for that fellow person, or that person having a lack of love for us. And it begins there. And then it begins to invoke a sense of faithlessness, in a way that people begin to look and go, well, why do they have it and I don't? Why are they doing what they're doing and I'm not? Why is God blessing them and not blessing me? Why is God using them and not using me? Are my gifts not as special as their gifts? Is my ability not as good as their ability? And that's the thing. Is students, as you walk into your next part of life, whatever plan that may be, whether it be college or the workforce or the military or wherever you go, trade school, you will encounter some sense of opposition if you are truly living on mission. But here's the thing that I want to continue to remind you, is that the way you respond can be a witness to the gospel. Because people will always be watching to how you respond. Because I remember when I first started being public about my faith, I felt like my life became under a microscope. People began to nitpick everything that I did, especially when I was in my place of business. Because I worked in the construction industry, which if you ever worked in the construction industry, it's a great industry, but sarcasm and beating each other up is an art form in that industry. And they love to do it. I did too a little bit. But needless to say, I did it lovingly. Exactly. But anyways, needless to say, when I started becoming public about my faith and started trying to share and to witness to my co-workers, right? I felt like things began to be put under a microscope. They began to say, well, but you used to do this. Well, you used to do this. Well, you used to do this, and you used to do this. And then opposition began to show up, and people began to say, well, but what about this, and what about this, and what about this? And then all of a sudden, not necessarily like just absolute outright persecution began to show up, but people began to not talk to me or speak kindly to me and things like that. And how you respond can sometimes be a witness, because if we respond in love, then guess what? That's a gospel witness message, because every time that Christ had opposition, he responded in love and kindness. Never once did he respond in hatred and in absolute slander and belittling. Which brings me to the next part of what is the root of our jealousy, or of the Sadducees' jealousy. Well, then it turns to a sense of false teaching or slander. Because it starts with a lack of love, and then it begins to go, well, why them and not me? And then it turns to, well, if I can't invoke either one of those two, well, then I'll just tear you down. I'll slander you. I'll beat you down. I'll tell everybody how ungrateful or how you're not good enough or how you're not great enough. And as we begin to see that, that's exactly what took place, because if we look in verse 18, what did it say? It says they arrested the apostles and put them in the public prison. They didn't put them away privately. They didn't do it quietly. They didn't do it in its most simplest way. No, they wanted to make an absolute spectacle of it. They wanted everybody to know that these guys were not to be followed, to not to be trusted, to not to be listened to. They wanted them to absolutely be embarrassed. And what happened? They put them in the public prison. They locked them away. They faced opposition. But like we see again, the church was resilient. The disciples were resilient. The people of God were resilient. Why? Because if you are living on mission, then there will be opposition. And then we get to verse 19. And so it says this. But during the night, an angel of the Lord opened the prison doors and brought them out. Because when we're truly living divinely set apart, there's going to be opposition. And there's going to be trial, and there's going to be struggle, and there's going to be suffering. And a lot of times it's going to feel like we're chained, like we're locked away, like we're walking through something difficult, like we're walking through things that are extremely hard. And that's part of it. I hate to burst your bubble if you've ever heard that walking the Christian life was meant to be easy. It's not. So what does it tell us? Well, it says that during the night, an angel opened the doors. So we've been divinely set apart, but then you will, in those times of opposition, be divinely delivered. Because we understand the weight of the mission. Don't be scared in those moments. Don't be scared of what can happen. Because do you think the disciples were scared as they were locked away in the prison? We see time and time again throughout the New Testament. They weren't scared. They weren't terrified. No, we see that there were times where they worshiped. They were still relaying the gospel message. They were still sharing. They were still talking. They were still enjoying the time that they had and utilizing it to continue to advance the kingdom. The location changed, but the mission never did. And we also see another thing here, that what the enemy opposes, God will set free. And we see this all throughout. You look in Genesis, you see, or not Genesis, I'm sorry, Exodus, you see Moses with the Israelites, right? Moses goes before Pharaoh with those famous words, right? Let my people go. What does Moses say? No. And then Moses says, okay. Goes back before him again. Let my people go. What does Pharaoh say? Nah. Not today. So then Moses tells him, hey, God's going to send some plagues. It's going to be cool. Don't worry about it. Let you know, it's going to like rain frogs and all kinds of cool stuff. You know, river going to turn to blood. Don't worry about it. Don't freak out. Just going to let you know, God's big. But anyways, let my people go, and this stuff won't happen anymore. Well, anyways, he continues to do it, and he continues to do it, and he continues to do it. And then what happens? He finally kills his firstborn son, and then what happens? Pharaoh says, all right, leave. Go. Take your people and exile. Get out of here. Go to wherever you want to go. You're not under the bondage anymore. God has set them free. But still, what happens? Pharaoh chased them down. And what did God do? He still delivered them. Time and time again, we see that God sets free what the enemy opposes. But I also want to talk about this too. And the disciples knew this very well. And this is a hard thing to understand, is that sometimes God does not always deliver this side of heaven. We can be walking through those trials and those sufferings and those persecutions. We can be walking through those difficult times, just like Paul with a thorn in the side. Paul was never delivered this side of heaven. And the disciples knew that, as they all faced a martyr's death except for one. Worldly persecution, though, still led to divine deliverance. Why? Because it still led them to their heavenly home. God still delivered. God still showed up. And there's another funny thing that we see in the text, because you see the Sadducees didn't believe in angels. And I think this is kind of one of those moments where God's kind of flexing his sense of humor a little bit. And so they didn't believe in angels, so what does God do? Who does he send to set them free? Angels, right? They don't believe in angels, so God's like, guess what? I'm going to send an angel to set these people free. The ones that you want to oppose, the ones that you want to silence, the ones that you want to stifle out, I'm going to send an angel to free them. The very thing that you don't believe in, and by the very same God that you claim didn't send the Messiah to raise from the dead, is going to free these exact people to then go and advance the kingdom. God sends an angel. So he divinely sets them apart, divinely delivers them, and then what happens in verse 20? Well, let's read it. It says, go and stand in the temple and speak to the people all the words of this life. There's a lot of action there. 3 words stand out. Go, stand, speak. See, the thing about it is that we have to remember is that action requires obedience, and it flips the other way too. Obedience requires action. We can't actively walk in obedience while sitting. You have to get up and go. You have to do it. And it's kind of funny because it's Grad Sunday, because I remember when I graduated high school, my mom walked in my room on my graduation day. She said, hey, it's graduation day. I wanted to let you know you have 3 options after today. You can go to you can go to college, you can go to trade school, or you can go to work. Key word there is go. Fly the nest. And just to kind of get under my mom's skin, I lived at home for 3 more years. But that's okay. I love my mom. But anyways, nevertheless, the thing about it is that action requires obedience, and we have to go. We were commanded to go. We see it in Matthew chapter 28. What does he say? Go and tell all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? We see that. But then we also forget the end of it. What does he say? I will be with you always to the end of the age. He is continuously reminding us, not only do you have the Spirit alive inside of you, the immeasurable power of God alive inside of you, but you also have the Spirit. You have the power. You have God at your very side. If God is for you, who is against you? We continuously forget about the power of God, and if we are just faithful, He is faithful to be right there with us. There's so many stories. Jeremiah had so many excuses. He was filled with it. But I'm young, but I can't do it. But I'm too weak, but I can't move. But I'm this, but I'm that. What did God say? Doesn't matter. Go. I don't care. Do it. I'll give you the words. I'll do everything for you. I just need someone to go. God's telling you the same thing. I just need someone to go. I'll do the rest. I'll equip you. I'll provide every resource you need. Just go. Go and do it. And he's telling the disciples the same thing. After he's delivered them, he's now divinely commissioning them. And so have you. You have been divinely commissioned. Students, you are divinely commissioned to go and to speak and to stand and to proclaim the word. You may be asking, well, what do I speak about? What do I talk about? I'm not trained in that. I didn't get a seminary degree. I'm not exactly the most proficient when it comes to the word. I think Roland summed it up best a couple weeks ago when he talked about how the disciples were ordinary men, right? They were idiotized, right? Or we get the word idiots, right? They were literally called idiots in the Bible. Look it up. Right? There wasn't anything special about them. But what does he say to do? He doesn't say go and give this super just thought out, well-planned sermon and just completely just baffle them with how knowledgeable you are with all the wisdom in the world. No, what does he say? He says go and speak the words of this life. Well, what life? The new life you have in Jesus Christ. This life. How Jesus brings us new life. All throughout we see, right? John 6:35, I am the bread of life. John 15:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. Right? John 1:4, in him was life, and the life was the light of man. You are called and you have been equipped to give life. You are divinely set apart. You've been divinely delivered, and now you've been divinely commissioned. And so when did they get after it? Well, let's look at verse 21 as we close. And when they heard this, they entered the temple at daybreak and began to teach. So how soon did they get to work? They were freed, and as soon as morning came, it was time to go to work. It's time to continue to advance the kingdom. And they had been told time and time and time again, stop. Don't do it. Don't proclaim it. Don't talk about it. Don't share it. But even in the face of adversity, even in the face of opposition, even in the face of persecution, the mission continued, and the mission never stopped. The location changed, but the advancement continued. We can't waste time. And a lot of us may be asking, well, what is the mission field look like? And for some of you students, that mission field is the college that you're going into, the workplace that you may be entering into, the trade school that you are going to. And for us, it's our place of business. But what I love to tell the students is if you truly want to know where the mission field is, you walked through those 4 doors this morning. When you walk back out those 4 doors, you're in the mission field again. Everywhere that you go and you encounter someone, that is potentially someone that you could save and turn towards the gospel message. But I want to correct that real quick. You don't do the saving. Your job is just to plant the seed. Your job is just to plant the seed of the gospel message, and God will do the rest. Matter of fact, I'm standing up here today because of that. Because someone was faithful and planted a seed that took root years later. You may never see the growth. You may never see the end result. But God will be faithful because of your faithfulness. God is always faithful. And the other thing that I want to remind us too is that we weren't asked to go and tell. We were told. We were commanded to go and to share. And students, you've been told that you've been the next generation, that you're the future of the church. But me personally, I don't like that. And the reason why I don't is because I think that you are the now generation. You are the church of today. And I think the church has a bright future. And we must continue to live on mission. We must continue to remember the promises of God and the promise that God has always told us. That if we are faithful to Him, He will be faithful to us. And the thing that I want to ask this morning as we close out, and it's one thing that I love to ask the students, is that now that you know all this information, now that you know that you've been divinely set apart, that you will be divinely delivered, and that you have been divinely commissioned to now go and live on mission, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to apply it? And who are you going to share it with? Let's pray.